I remember noticing that your pulse was erratic, and it was going quite fast, so I had a good idea that it was probably atrial fibrillation. And of course we did the ECG and it was quite clear that you had atrial fibrillation. Surprising really, because atrial fibrillation, generally speaking, is a disease of older people. People usually in their 60s, 70s and 80s. And about 10% of people aged over 75 have atrial fibrillation. So it's a common rhythm disturbance. It's probably affecting about 1.2 million people in the UK at the moment. But in young people, you do worry. You worry about the possibility of a horrible virus that's affected the heart. You worry about excess alcohol consumption, the use of illicit drugs, or even genetic causes. There is a situation whereby certain endurance athletes, particularly very tall, slim people that have been exercising for years and years, that may become predisposed to something like atrial fibrillation. But of course, we had all of these questions at the time. It was very clear to us that you weren't a heavy alcohol user and that you'd never used any recreational drugs, so we knew that. So it was a case of whether you had something called a myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart that can be quite dangerous if someone carries on exercising during this period. So we went on to scan your heart, and it showed that your heart was actually pumping well, other than the atrial fibrillation. And then of course you did the cardiopulmonary exercise test, if I remember rightly. And you didn't do quite as well as you thought you might do then. And then we gave you a drug on the understanding that if we could try and get rid of it, that would be a good thing. We gave you something called flecainide, if I remember. Then I think I followed up with a telephone call. And you told me that it had gone away, which is obviously a very good sign. And we saw you once more after that in our clinic, and everything seemed to be stable at that point. And then you went on and did something absolutely amazing. Epic second gold.
That was good.
And what was going through your mind? I mean, the thought of having a situation like atrial fibrillation that's associated with a 25% reduction in cardiac output. I mean, the thought of you not making the boat, maybe. I mean, did that ever?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, initially, I'd already had a lot of injuries up to that point, and this one just seemed like almost a final nail in the coffin. Already had a few operations and finally got through that hurdle just as this one arrived. So I was pretty fed up as it was, and then this one suddenly seemed a bit beyond an injury. It's not something you can easily understand. It's not like you need an operation on your knee, or there's a muscle torn, or back injury, which is sort of skeletal, and you can understand it in an injury capacity, and you can see there's an end point to it, and you can get over that. This is something that's very personal to you. Obviously, it's your heart is right in the middle of your body, and you can't get to it. It's just something, and it's also, it made me realise, this it's a muscle, and it's been working in this way for, I think at that point, 27, 28 years, in a normal way, and then suddenly it decided, or for whatever, some trigger had caused it to start doing something different, and that was quite a shock to me, because it was, it's out of its routine. It's and it's not something you can easily get to and understand, I think. And it's also something which was very likely going to affect me after rowing as well. And then, reading up a lot of the stats, it can lead to increase in sort of strokes and heart attacks further along. And whilst it's something, we understand quite well in how to treat, and actually understanding what causes it, it's still a bit of an unknown. And obviously, I don't fit into that category of being over 60s, overweight smoker, and I was quite, this is a little bit unfair.
But if I remember rightly, your uncle has atrial fibrillation.
Yeah, my uncle. Well, my dad, my other uncle now has got it. There's another family member who has very recently got it. It's as though the dominoes are sort of falling, and there's an obvious sort of family trait there. We're trying to understand a bit more in our own family about why that's the case, but.
It does have a genetic component. There are some families where people develop atrial fibrillation at quite a young age. We call this lone atrial fibrillation. By lone, it means we can't really find an obvious explanation for it. And lone atrial fibrillation usually has quite a good outlook, in that although you hear about the incidence of stroke going up by 5-fold if someone's got atrial fibrillation, it's uncommon in lone atrial fibrillation. So I was quite reassured in that regard. I was also reassured that your atrial fibrillation was not due to high blood pressure, blocked arteries, or too much alcohol. And the real issue is whether exercise per se was going to exacerbate this, because it's not exactly simple exercise that you're doing. You're probably training about 20 hours a week and very intensively. And I was just wondering whether the stretch on the atria may cause the atrial fibrillation to become worse. It was a case of just observing, keeping our fingers and toes crossed, and hoping that you'd stay out of it. And I gather that you had a few little bursts of it.
Well, certainly in terms of palpitations, so, afterwards, and I think it took about 3 weeks before I could do any proper training, because I think, as we talked at the time, the heart needed to recover and get back into normal sort of sinus rhythm, and then it's strong enough to actually do some sort of, put a load on it, as it were. But and over that period, the next couple of months, then there were still palpitations. But then, and so each time there was a palpitation, then you quickly check your heart, make sure it's not, it's not going into an arrhythmic. And so there were a few sort of moments, but on the whole, after that, then I think I was very conscious of what all the triggers might be. So I remember going through and actually speaking to you a little bit about what all those triggers could be, and having a list of perhaps about 10 things, actually, even if they were very minor and more than likely nothing. We just had a good solid list. And so anything, whether it was heartburn, being at altitude, stress through the vocal cords, because that can bring tension or something down. I can't remember the venal cave. That's it. Then when the nerve goes down, all those things, and trying to then, well, how can you mitigate those triggers so that you just reduce the probability of it happening? Because there's always going to be that chance, and there was always that thought that it could happen on an Olympic finals day.
Yes.
So I think I was quite conscious about keeping that quiet in the team as well, because I wanted to get selected, and I didn't want to be a liability.
Yes.
But I was also confident that I could manage this, and it is linked to stress, and if I can keep a lot of those factors down, then I'll be as safe as anyone. That was my approach. Whether it was right or not, I don't know. But anyway, we got the gold medal. So
well, we knew your heart was in a good
exactly.
state. We knew that, and we'd seen how fast your atrial fibrillation was capable of going. It was a case of ensuring that you stayed out of atrial fibrillation, merely because a 25% reduction in cardiac output from one of the 4 crews would have meant a serious reduction in boat power. Yeah. Especially how close these races are.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it was just, it was a sort of a, I'm not sure, I wouldn't say the word secret, but I remember watching the boat go and just thinking, he's obviously doing all right at the moment.
Yeah, he's doing okay.
Yeah.
No, it's very true. And with the thing with this condition with athletes, then it's completely game over. There's absolutely no way you can perform to any level. You can't train with it. So it is pretty much sort of life and death in our sport, in succeeding in our sport. So.
But I guess you're right that if you're performing at your level, and it's a sustained form of exercise, it's not a start-stop discipline that relies merely on skill. This is a discipline that relies on sheer strength, determination, willpower, and a fantastic cardiovascular apparatus. And I guess you're right that if you're losing 25% of that power, you are not going to be competing at world level. You may be okay at club level or even recreationally, where you can actually put your hand up and say, chaps, I'm going to stop now because I'm not feeling very well. It's slightly difficult at the 2012 games, of course.